There is a big editing mistake in my book, MacArthur's Bloody Butchers. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and today I want to talk about the obligations that I think that authors, writers have to readers of their book. These are only obligations I think that writers, authors have if they intend to sell, market their books. Okay, so I've identified three things that I think are obligations that writers have to readers, that authors have to readers. One is to produce the best book you can produce. So I mentioned in the opening, there is a big editing mistake in MacArthur's Bloody Butchers. Somewhere near the end of the book, I've kind of blacked out what page it's on. One of the editor's notes got left in the actual text. So if you don't know, when a book is sent back to the author for editing, sometimes this comes back several times, sometimes from more than one editor. And in Microsoft Word, there's a way in which you can go and put questions or comments on a line-by-line basis. You know, editors use these things when they talk with authors about moving things around, about the wording, about trying to, add clarity, about, specific things like maybe they think the sentence is too long and want you to break it up. But they put these little notes in there. And the author then clears that up or explains why they don't want to make that change, and they type a little note there as well. Somehow, either one of those, which is a note from me to the editor, or a note the editor makes to the actual typesetter, because they make those notes in the same document typesetters, one of those got left in the book, and it kind of disrupts the reading at some point. So there is a mistake in my book. So when I tell you I think it's the obligation of the writer to, there's at least one, I'm sure there's more than one. When I tell you there's at least the obligation of the writer and the publisher of the book also to produce the best book possible, that doesn't necessarily mean I think a book is going to be perfect or has to be perfect. I hope my book is still good. I hope the people who read it still thought it was good or okay despite that mistake. But that doesn't mean that I think that you can just not put forth the effort. You should know, and I'll use myself as an example. Books go through several different editing rounds. One of those rounds of editing is called a developmental edit, where an editor will read your book and say, hey, I think it would be better if you organize it this way. This happened with my book. I completely reorganized my book and rewrote it in a way which fit more with what the editor, the acquiring editor, thought would work better for the publisher. And so I rewrote it that way. And then my book was sent to readers who read the book and made suggestions about things that they thought should be changed. Like, for instance, one of the suggestions made about my book was that I move the acknowledgments to the front of the book from the back of the book, which, I was happy to do. And then it goes, to line editors. Those are the people who read your book and check to make sure that it's factually right, and that the sentences make sense, and the writing flows, and the story and the whole narrative works. And then it goes to a copy editor who looks for things like you should have a comma there, or that semicolon should be a colon. And that happens. And all that happened with my book. And each time there were revisions we made, it was sent back to me, because I don't know if you know this or not, but authors are the ones who actually make those changes. You look at what the editor suggested, what the editor's notes are, and you make those changes. And you can say no, even though I think I only said no one time. In the entire process of this book, you can say no, but I think part of producing the best book possible is listening to professionals who, particularly in a niche genre that I wrote, which is military history, probably know a lot more about what their readers want and what the people who buy their books want. And I wanted my book to be traditionally published, and it was, and I wanted it to be available for sale to people who read military history. And it was, and so I kind of agreed to go along with almost all those changes. But there's a lot that goes into that. Now, with self-published authors, that's a lot trickier, because the expense of, for me, when traditionally publishing the book, the expense of editing and all that kind of work and typesetting and setting the book up and cover art, etc., and the pictures that went on the inside and how all that works, other people did that for me. And that's why they get, that's why the publisher gets such a big chunk of whatever money the book makes. But if you're an independent author and you're publishing on your own, you've got to come up with a way to do all that for yourself. And so I do think there are different, perhaps, standards that we should, put in place or think about when we're talking about an independently published author, a self-published author, versus a traditionally published author. Because I think self-published authors are in a little bit more of a bind. They have to pay for editors. They have to pay perhaps for a developmental editor, cover artist, Somebody maybe they learn how to set the book on their own in Kindle, KDP, or what the other self-publishing platforms are. They hire a copy editor, but they have to pay for all those things, and that's money out of pocket with no guarantee they're going to make money back. And on top of that, they have to then be the only people to market the book to try to get it to make money back. So, I don't think the standard has to be quite so high, but at the same time, I don't think that independent authors can skip those steps. They either have to find somebody to edit the book for them who will do it and is qualified to do it, or help them do it for little or no money, or they have to become really proficient in doing it themselves, or they have to pay somebody to do it for them. Now, a lot of independent writers, a lot of self-published writers are really good editors and edit well on their own, but I would hazard a guess that almost every self-published author, having done most of the work for themselves, and even if they hired somebody to do it, find mistakes, grammatical mistakes, typesetting mistakes, other kinds of mistakes in their books. But where I think self-published authors maybe get in trouble is where they don't take that step seriously enough. That they don't take, and if they get criticism back, or they have beta readers, they have editors, they feel so too close to the story, and they don't necessarily take all that advice because they know one way or the other they're going to publish the book. And I do think you can see self-published authors who do not deliver on the product that probably at a level their readers or the people who buy their books probably could expect. I do think that's one thing we owe our readers. Another thing I think the second thing I think writers owe their readers, and this will be a lot faster, is you need to tell the truth about your book. Whatever genre your book falls into, you need to tell people that. My book is military history. It's a work of nonfiction. That's what it is. If I were to talk about this book in as dramatic as I tried to make it, and as personal as I tried to make it, and as much as I tried to make it a narrative, the story of 4 men involved in this military unit, it is still a military history. If I were to promote it as a dramatic fictional telling of men at war and things like that, then that wouldn't be accurate, and you'd get a book that was way more military history than you wanted, and I don't think that's fair. By the same token, if you publish a book and you say, oh, this is romantasy, but it really isn't romantasy, it's just kind of fantasy and there may be a love interest, then I think you have mismarketed your book and you have misled your readers. You need to be, truthful, I think, with, if you're out there promoting your book and self-publishing your book, or even traditionally publishing a book, you need to be truthful with your readers about, the steps you've taken to try to make sure it's the best book possible if you're going to be out there talking about that. And I think that a lot of self-published authors, and even I think traditionally published authors, and sometimes publishers themselves, get a book in trouble by not being honest with it. That what it says on the cover is not what the book actually delivers. And I think that's an important thing that writers owe to readers. And the final thing I would say that I think that authors owe to readers is space. And you hear this all the time. Once the book is published, it is no longer my book. I call this my book. Well, this is my actual copy. I call this my book because I'm the writer and I wrote it. But once somebody buys one, it becomes their book. And so what they think about it is their business. If they choose to share what they think about that book in a review, that's their business. If they choose to think the book was terrible and tell everybody they think the book was terrible, that's their business. If they choose to think the book was it's okay, and they choose to tell people that, that's their business. They choose to tell people the book is great, that's their business. And it's not the business of the writer to confront readers about their opinions about the book. So, subjectivity means that not everybody's going to read the book the way you wrote it. Not everybody's going to get the things in the book that you wanted them to get. Not everybody's going to like the book. Not everybody's going to think all the hard work you put into writing the book was well spent or came out well in the end. And that's their business because they bought the book and you sold them the book. And once that takes place, once the book's been published, once you put it out there for people to buy, to spend money on, then it's their book. And they get to think what they want to, and they get to say what they want to about it. And I think that's a really important thing. And one of the things we've seen, I think, with the rise of perhaps independent publishing or self-published authors is we see more and more confrontations between writers and authors. Maybe social media, not so much self-publishing, but social media creates more opportunities for clashes between writers and authors. And I just think those are bad. 97.4% of the time, I believe the author is in the wrong. Anyway, there you go. There are the 3 things I think that writers owe to readers. If you have thoughts about this, other things you think writers owe to readers, please leave those in the comment section down below. And as always, thank you for watching.